juste demandé à un des filles de venir pour faire circuler. Ouais.
Quand on aura trempé, si tu veux, on
Oui,
demandera de l'aide.
je vais voir.
Ok, ouais,
Faire.
parfait, super. Allez, on est parti.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again, and thank you for coming. It's a really nice size audience, so we're really happy to have all of you here today. I'm Karen Marin. I think you probably know me now because this is my fourth time up here before the microphone. With the Ascensional, I'm advisor and contributor, and this year we thought it would be really, really interesting for Essence to invite one of the major fragrance houses to come and speak about a very key ingredient in the perfumery palette. So we have special guests today from Givaudan. So we have Eugénie Briot, she's a historian, and with her is Arnaud Gougonboul, who's the head of Global Marketing Insights and Image for Fine Fragrance. And today we're going to take you on a deep dive into patchouli and why we love this ingredient. Well, here you go.
Yes, definitely. The question is why? Why do we love patchouli? And we'll try to find an answer together to this question, wondering where it comes from and why do we love it not only in olfactive terms, but also in terms of imagination and imagery. What is behind, the image of patchouli? How does it resonate in our imagination to make us patchouli a very special ingredient in our hearts? So, the first question we can ask about patchouli is where does it come from? And in itself, it's not a question that is easy to answer because it's a real journey I'm going to take you through to follow the roots of patchouli and to understand where it comes from. The first step in the journey is Philippines. Because apparently the first mentions we have about patchouli is about the Philippines. So the plant seems to be coming from this region, and right from the beginning it is associated with very special medicinal properties and medicinal uses. So it is a plant that is anti-inflammatory, antiseptic, antibacterial, antifungal, antidepressant, and insect repellent. So for all these reasons, patchouli is magic, because for the people who used this plant, as a native bush somewhere in the Philippines, it was not a plant like others. It is a plant whose family, the botanical order, is Lamiales. Lamiales is a big family of plants that are mainly fragrant, and among them you can also find sage or mint. So these plants have medicinal properties that are, of course, of interest, but it's especially the case of patchouli. So it has been used for this purpose in this context right from its native kind of nature. And it's been used by the people of the Philippines as either a leaf or, macerated in oils or in such type of contexts. So that's when the journey begins, because once it is said that it's coming from the Philippines, then it's a long route to start. The first mention of patchouli is not of patchouli itself, because it has been described in 1837 as Mentha cablin blanco. So the botanist was named Blanco, and he described it as Mentha. So there was a mistake on the order it belonged to. but it is described as part of the flora of the Philippines. Then another botanist identified it as, under the name we know today of Pogostemon cablin, Bentham. So the botanist was named Bentham, and he kind of chose the right family to classify the patchouli in, Pogostemon. But in between, there was a French botanist who had also described very extensively patchouli. The name of the botanist was Pelletier. He had this plant in a hothouse in France, and he described it very precisely. And he gave him the name of Pogostemon patchouli. So that's why, at the end of the day, we have several names for this plant. We know it most of the time under the name of patchouli, but it's not its botanical name, but it is the name we love, because the name itself is full of mystery. It's full of evocations. It is patchouli, a name that sounds exotic and extravagant in a way. So it is the name under which it's going to be known. Pogostemon is not the one that is going to be mostly known, but right from the 19th century, patchouli will be the name under the plant will be known, and it is the name about which we're going to dream about it. And yes, among the plants that are used by perfumers, most of them have a name by a Latin origin. So I don't say it's not exotic, but it's not the same. When you have Minta, sage, they all have a Latin name that sounds quite European, but patchouli sounds different, definitely. So, this being said, we have also to keep it in mind that this name patchouli, which is the Indian name, coming from Tamil, so it is the language that is spoken, a language, one of the numerous languages being spoken in the south of India. So it means green leaf, with pachai meaning green and ilai meaning leaf. But in India, it is a name that is going to embed different type of species. So under the name patchouli are going to be comprised until the 19th century and even beyond plants that do not necessarily belong to Pogostemon family. And there is another plant especially that is the Pogostemon heneimus, that is a different species and that grows in India before patchouli. So in India it's known as pacha, pachapat or patchouli. So pacha and pachapat being maybe even more exotic than patchouli. You will agree on that. So this is all this imagery that people have in mind when they come to discover patchouli in the 19th century. And that's the last step, let's say, of the roots of patchouli, of the journey of patchouli, the moment when it leaves Philippines to spread around the world. And again, there are several steps to this. So one of the first steps is when patchouli is going to be, let's say, introduced in China. It comes right from the Middle Ages, from the 6th century, so quite soon in history, and it will become again part of the Chinese medicine and a very important plant in this respect. And from China, it's going to be sent to Malaysia. And this is where, in the 19th century, a first extensive culture of patchouli is going to start. So it is when it's really going to become an ingredient for perfumers, 19th century in Malaysia. It will be cultivated at a large scale and exported to France, to Europe, and from then to Indonesia, to Sumatra, Java, and Sulawesi, steps after steps, in Indonesia. And the other way the patchouli is going to take is India. And it's going to start being introduced in India in 1934, being sent from the botanical gardens of Malaysia. Malaysia is under the British rule at the time. Calcutta is also part of the British Commonwealth, and there are exchanges between these botanical gardens, and that's how patchouli is introduced from Malaysia to India. And in our imagination, this product is going to remain very much related to India, even if its origin, as you have understood, is not really related to India, because it's going to be associated to India right from the first third of the 19th century. It is this exotism related to India that is going to be associated to the plant in general, in our ways to imagine patchouli. So the first way we're going to discover patchouli in Europe is through the use that is made of the leaves to protect the shawls that the ladies from the 19th century loved to wear. So these, as we said, patchouli leaves have properties to repel insects. And for these reasons, the delicate woolen cashmeres from India are protected with these patchouli leaves when sent from India to Europe. So the shawl you are seeing here dates back to the beginning of the 19th century. So, one question: does it smell of patchouli? It's a trick question. Did you listen well? Can it smell of patchouli in 1802? No. I said it was a tricky question. It can't, because the culture of patchouli had not been yet introduced in India at this date. It was introduced later, a little bit later, 30 years later. So at first, shawls didn't smell of patchouli. And still, the ladies from the beginning of the 19th century loved them. Okay. But patchouli is really associated, so they kept, buying these shawls, loving these shawls, wearing these shawls, and so on, during several decades. But patchouli really became the smell of these shawls under the Second Empire in France. So in the years 1850 or something like this, when patchouli started to be grown in India and used in India to send the shawls to Europe. Yes. So at this stage, that's why we always find it associated to the Second Empire and not before. Not really before the Second Empire in France. And it's also difficult to know, because, there is, at some point, it is said not to be fashionable anymore, but to be the smell of the cocotte, of the, let's say, demi-mondaine or courtesan of the end of the 19th century and so on. And then patchouli, at this stage of time, of history, is not associated to elegance anymore, but to something that is less, classy, let's say. But it's difficult to say, from this date on, it's not fashionable anymore. So it probably came little by little because, there was this connection between the shawls and patchouli. Then, if you want to make false shawls, make counterfeits of shawls, not coming from India, and to sell them at an expensive price, what can you do? Yes, you can perfume them with patchouli. And that's what happened. So after a while, patchouli was used to perfume these shells that were not necessarily really coming from India, but also coming from France, for instance. And because they smelled of patchouli, people believed that they were coming from India. So at this stage, patchouli became the smell of, something fake. Something that was not elegant anymore, that was, just the smell of somebody pretending to be of the best, from the best society and not being. So it was the moment when, yes, this smell was kind of declassified and little by little became vulgar. Because there is this question about, what is real and what is fake behind patchouli, and patchouli, from being the smell of elegance, became the smell of fake. Poor patchouli. So unfair. But that's what happened. And yes, from this time on, it also started to become of interest for perfumers. And it's, no, sorry, I made a mistake, it was the previous. Yeah. And it also became right from the middle of the 19th century, a perfumer like Septimus Pies, an English perfumer, tells about patchouli, explained it's probably the most powerful ingredient among all the materials a perfumer can use. So it's recognized for this fact that it's very powerful. And it's also recognized for the fact it's long-lasting. So it's going to start being used for these properties, power and long-lastingness. In a botanical journal from the mid-19th century, there is a full story being told about the first time patchouli arrived by boat in London. So it is said that on the 27th of June, 1844, Mr. Ellis, drug broker of Fenchurch Street, put up for sale at Garraway's Coffee House 46 cases of patchouli. Some of the packages consisted of half boxes containing 50 pounds each, others of whole boxes holding 110 pounds each. Everything is extremely precise. The price asked was 6 shillings per pound, but there were no bidings. Nobody wanted to buy it. Probably at the time nobody had thought of perfuming the false shells with patchouli. And it is explained that this lot came from New York, to which place it was said to have been carried from China. So quite a long journey for this patchouli to reach London. The dry tops imported into England are on food, so they are described, and then it is said the odor is strong and peculiar, and it is funny the way it is explained. I cannot call it agreeable, though some others do, while many persons regard it as disagreeable. So actually there are people liking it, people not liking it, and people being in between. Okay, which is maybe quite normal. But it started to be used either to perfume the cloth, so far beyond the use of these shells, it could just be put in the linen, in the linen of people to keep the insects away from the cloth, or as a potpourri. So it was also a way to kind of disinfect the air of the house and to keep epidemics away and so on. And for this purpose, it was really associated also to the Second Empire. And in the 1930s, there was a theater play that was written by a French writer called Armand Salacrou. The title of the theater play is Patchouli ou les désordres de l'amour. The plot is very complicated. I won't try to tell you about, But there is a question that is asked by a journalist, why patchouli? It's never explained why this character is called patchouli. And the conclusion is that probably it is because the character loves the Second Empire, which was the time when everything was about chal from India's crinolines and this heady perfume. So it's very associated to this period of time as being, okay, the time of patchouli. So the third time when patchouli was really in front of the scene is the 70s, when, again, it became used heavily, let's say, by hippies. And at this time, it was used because it was part of the counterculture of the time. It was part of the way the young generation of the 1970s wanted to show they had different types of values, different ways to see things, different tastes also. And it was, let's say, a kind of transgression to choose this perfume that was considered as vulgar in the past, and that was not a perfume. That was just a raw material as such. This is also part of the provocation, let's say. You know, the fact that it's not a perfume that would be part of a culture of consumption, but a perfume that is only a raw material. So there is a famous character who was age 20 in 1968, who has told about his love for patchouli. Do you guess who he is? John Lennon? Janis Joplin? Jimi Hendrix? Jean-Claude Helena. Jean-Claude Helena was 20 in 1968, and he writes, patchouli was our smell. It smelled humus, it smelled undergrowth, youth, and freedom. So yes, patchouli for this whole generation was the smell of freedom. And it has remained the smell of freedom because it's really at this moment that, you know, this imagination about patchouli could grow from the raw material that could be known as such, and not, again, let's say, and not only part of a perfume. Because being quite a long time, you know, between the 19th century, when it was used as an insect repellent, and the 70s, patchouli was part of the architecture of the chypre. And it played a big role in this respect, you know. It was, so here, the chypre by Coty in 1917 appears as the first perfume, but of course it was already used before, because there were chypre before the chypre de Coty. But it played a big role in the architecture of the chypre, together with rose, with bergamot, together also with cistus sustine and oak moss, of course. But it also played a big role in some ambery perfumes. So again, you know, being part of a whole architecture. And he played often a big role together with rose. So we can smell opium. And he started to be played with rose, for instance, in Shocking by Schiaparelli in a very obvious way. It is really a rose patchouli accord that is created there by Jean-Carl in 1937. And then again, this rose patchouli accord is present in Aromatics Elixir. And in this family of ambery notes being associated and being built on patchouli, there is opium. So opium, interestingly enough, is created in 1977 at a time when the patchouli from Réminiscence and all the patchouli trend of the 70s is already really a part of the culture of the time. So yes, probably Opiums owes a lot also to this love of patchouli that this generation has. Jean-Louis Suzak. The one you're smelling here is, it is the version that is today on the market. Okay. Yes. So it's not the Osmotek? No, it's not the Osmotek version. But you can still feel the presence of patchouli, yes. And then from the... oh yes, sorry.
Sorry.
Ah, attends, t'en as pas. Ah.
Non, j'en ai plus d'autres. T'en as
So from this time on, yes, it started from the time of the patchouli by reminiscence. It started to play a role in niche perfumery. Oops, because patchouli by reminiscence also kind of started together with what, l'artisan parfumeur that appeared later and so on, started this interest for one single raw material. And it is part of the counterculture also of the 70s, wishing something else, that the perfumes that are sold together with a big storytelling and big communication. So this niche perfumery, yes, maybe owes a little also to the patchouli by reminiscence and its success. And later, patchouli became also key in the way it played with ethyl maltol in Angel to be the starting point of the Gourmand family. So you're going to smell Angel as well. And then its latest interpretation and the latest moment when it was reinterpreted in a different way. So you are going to smell Angel. And it's the way it was used in what is called modern Chypre with Coco Mademoiselle in 2001 or Narciso Rodriguez for Her in 2003. Being used, as a kind of compensation for the limitation of oak moss and to create more, let's say, a transparent version of the Chypre structure. So, in this respect, what the love for patchouli of the 70s started is maybe something that goes beyond the point of patchouli itself, because it started what later Serge Lutens called about cèdre. When there is a beautiful interview of Serge Lutens about Féminité du Bois, when he explains that what he wanted to do with Féminité du Bois is sublimate cedarwood. And then, as soon as he pronounced the word sublimate, he said, no, I don't like this word. No, I wanted to put cedarwood in accusation. And this is so Serge Lutens. And this idea to put a raw material in accusation, in a way, is going to be the principle on which niche perfumery is going to build itself, with the idea to have raw material tell something, tell what they have to tell, and tell new stories that they have never told before. So definitely, Patchouli started telling its story in the 19th century, started telling another kind of story in the 70s, and then the niche, the way it was used through a niche perfumery, helped having him telling new and different stories again and again. And after all, the fact Patchouli is always in this quest for authenticity, because there has always been this play between, fake and authentic in Patchouli, is interesting because it has always remained true to itself. It is what it is rough, it is raw, it is sometimes, unpleasant, pleasant, and so on, but it is true to itself. And it has a lot to tell for this reason. And it's a little bit like Patchouli was, let's say, the bad boy of perfumery. Playing with Rose, the civilized princess of perfumery, to form a beautiful couple and telling beautiful stories together. So Arnaud is going to tell you more about the stories of Patchouli today.
Yeah, because, you know, as Eugénie was saying, you know, Patchouli is rich. In fact, it's rich from its name, it's rich from its evocation, it's rich for where it comes from, but it's rich also in terms of olfaction. And in fact, some perfumer always say that when you add a bit of patchouli into the fragrance, you know, it's what makes the fragrance beat from the heart, you know, so it's a really nice image, because with patchouli you can dose and you can overdose, so it's like with love, you know, it can be a soft love or a true passion, but adding patchouli for sure is absolutely changing, you know, the whole olfactive pyramid of your perfume. It's an ingredient that is mysterious, as Eugénie was saying, perhaps because it's different names, perhaps because it's different origin, perhaps because, you know, sometimes it was associated with realness and authenticity or with fakeness, we don't know. And sometimes it is also misunderstood, because for some it's a purely masculine ingredient, for some it's feminine. In fact, you will see that patchouli has no gender. Patchouli can, you know, fall in love with all the type of structure in perfumery, masculine and feminine. We all say that patchouli is very dense and rich, but it is used also into softener to drive freshness. So as you can see, patchouli is very versatile. And sometimes we say it is misunderstood because you still have consumers that are in love with patchouli and some that hated it a lot. Particularly in China, it's very difficult, you know, because thanks to this origin of the traditional Chinese medicine association, sometimes it can be difficult for Chinese consumers to love the original damp, earthy type of patchouli, as in America, where it is so associated with the 70s and the hippies that sometimes there is a vintage connotation that is not so pleased by American consumers. But when it comes to Europe, you know, of course, patchouli has always been one of the key ingredients of perfumery. And to produce it, it's not an easy thing. You know, I put you some figure on the slide. You need 200 kilograms of fresh patchouli to obtain 50 kilograms of dry patchouli, because, you know, you have to let the leaves dry for around 4 to 5 days. And then you have to have 8 hours of steam distillation to transform this 50 kilograms of dry patchouli into 1 kilogram of essential oil. So, of course, patchouli is one of the richest, perhaps, olfactory notes in perfumery, and as such, it has reinvented itself also thanks to new techniques in terms of extraction, you know, because of the richness of the ingredient itself, you can really play on the different facets, and thanks to different methodology, you can extract and sublimize some of these facets. So at the moment, you know, our perfumer, they are working with 5 different types of patchouli, and I will try to explain you a bit, and you will smell 2 of them, from the most classical one to the most, I would say, avant-garde one. So, of course, the most classical quality of patchouli, it's a patchouli oil, you know, the famous one after the distillation. And we all love this patchouli oil that has this reminiscence, you know, of the 60s and the 70s. It's really something that is absolutely pure, strong, you know, it has a kind of tobacco notes in it. It's also a bit earthy. So it's the reason why sometimes it is disturbing some consumer. But at the same time, you know, you may find some cocoa facet in it that give this gourmand little feeling in it, you know, that some people fell in love with. And perhaps it's the reason why it is so appreciated in combination with maltol to create gourmand notes. Of course, you can also enrich this patchouli oil, you know, and do some fraction of it. And this is really interesting because thanks to the fraction distillation, you can really craft something that is more on the woody side of the patchouli. So something that will, in fact, impact the dry down of your fragrance, something that will give this strong character and this strong base to your perfume. Then you have a type of patchouli that is often forgotten because it exists. It's the Patchouli Absolute. And this one is it's absolutely amazing in terms of quality. It is sometimes forgotten because it had a tendency to really darken the juice. And we know that if you want to have coloration for your juice, for marketing reasons, you know, sometimes you have a side effect of it. But what is absolutely extraordinary with the Patchouli Absolute, and we will smell one fragrance that is containing Patchouli Absolute a bit later on, is that in fact it's absolutely going into the more gourmand cocoa area, like dry fruits, you know, so you have all the sublimation of the dry area of the patchouli and the cocoa facets that gives in fact this mouth-watering effect and this really dark cocoa effect to the patchouli. And then you have the patchouli that is perhaps the one that is the most used nowadays, is the patchouli cœur that we will smell today. And the patchouli cœur, of course, why is it so interesting? Because it's the one that was first crafted for Coco Mademoiselle, that wanted to reinvent the Chypre category. But you know, the issue with the Chypre category is that, again, it was not so much loved by all consumers around the world. So they needed to lighten up the Chypre effect. They needed to brighten up the patchouli side of the cocoa of the Chypre. And they decided to work and to create this new patchouli extract, that is the patchouli cœur, that is perhaps at the moment, that is perhaps at the moment one of the expression of the patchouli that is the cleanest one, you know, when it's come to patchouli. So it's really something that is, of course, less earthy, less comfort than the traditional one, so less vintage also. It is clearer, more nervous, you know, and at the same time, it's really the epitome of the modern type of patchouli that you can find in a lot of fragrance. But what is interesting with patchouli is that you can also innovate. And this is the case of the Akigala wood, that is a specific ingredient crafted by Givaudan. And it's an interesting one because it's also an upcycling ingredient. In fact, we are using the residues of the patchouli traditional oil distillation. And thanks to an enzymatic enrichment, we have been able, to extract a new type of olfactive facets coming from patchouli. And why is it interesting? Because, of course, it's very sustainable because it's upcycling, so you are using residues. And at the same time, it's interesting because it's adding a new facet in terms of creativity when it's come to woody notes to the palette of the perfumer, and also when it's come to the spicy area of the palette of the perfumer. Because you will smell it. In fact, it's quite spicy. It is a bit cold also. That is quite interesting because patchouli generally can be smelled more warm by certain people, even if some of them, because of the comfort facet, say it's cold. But with the Akigala wood, you are really playing on the cold area of the patchouli. And what is important is that it's giving an amazing sillage to the perfume. It has been used by both on feminine and masculine fragrances to add signature and sillage to those perfumes. So as you can see, patchouli is rich also because of its multiple facets that you can extract more or less and combine after when you are a perfumer to really recreate, new ideas into different directions. And you can see that from an olfactive point of view, you can go really into different directions when it comes to patchouli. You can create clean fragrances, or you can create the most sultry fragrances that you can imagine. And this is something interesting because, I love to say that for me, patchouli is perhaps one of the most paradoxical and ambiguous ingredient in the palette of the perfumery because, it can smell earth, it can smell what we imagine about its birthplace nowadays, that is Indonesia mainly, but at the same time, it's in a lot of products you would never imagine it was included within. And it's really interesting to see that, in fact, this ingredient can be played into common product and also into the most noble product of perfumery. I will give you some examples, but for example, when it comes to fine fragrance, you can, in fact, create masculine note like eau sauvage, because if you add a touch of patchouli with a lot of the cologne structure and a lot of citrus, then it's totally changed the perception of the citrus and you will go less functional, you will have a stronger sillage, you will create a kind of cold and warmth, in fact, balance. And of course, within the feminine area, we've seen the chronology from Eugénie, Génie, you know, it was at the origin of the rejuvenation of many olfactive families and the birth of a new one. So the rejuvenation of Chypre, but also the birth of the gourmand notes. And now we are talking about also these icons, you know, when it's come to white patchouli and bright patchouli. So I was telling you that, in fact, it was relevant cross-category because, in fact, it's really interesting. And, of course, I will talk about perfume a lot today. But I wanted just to give you some highlight about how patchouli is used in other category because this can also open all our chakras, you know, about the type of olfactive facets that you can create with patchouli. For example, it's an ingredient that is absolutely key in fabric softeners. If you are looking all the famous blue variants all around the world that are generally fougère or chypre type of structure, in fact, they are containing a lot of patchouli. And why? Because patchouli, it's one of the ingredients that sticks the most to the clothes, that stick the most, in fact, to the wet tissues and the wet fabrics. And as such, you know, it is very substantive. So it's super interesting. But it can be used also into personal care products, you know, soap, you know, body lotions, or it can be used also into shower gels. Why? Because, as I told you, you know, it has this comfort facet that is bringing freshness, but that is also bringing verticality to the fragrance. So it's really pushing some of the other notes to express themselves better. Like, for example, fruity notes. A hint of patchouli with fruity note will make the fruits even more juicy, even more explosive, and more long-lasting. And of course, it can be used into candles. Of course, you know, it has a nice effect, you know, it's very niche. But the other reason why it is used into candle is because it's a performance booster. If you had a drop of patchouli into your candle formulation, you know, it will bloom into the room, you know, for a long time. So it can also absolutely change, and particularly in candle, a floral note. A patchouli with a floral, and then the floral will be even more blooming. It will be even more long-lasting and diffusive. And of course, you know, when it comes to fine fragrance, its use never went out of fashion. It has, like, you know, a kind of cycle of life, but it never went out of fashion. It's the ingredient of the chypre, the fougère, the amber fragrance. It has a lot of character, you know, because of its richness. It has also a strong technical impact because of its verticality. It has power, it has sillage. It's the magical trick, you know. Some perfumers say it's the couteau suisse of perfumery also because it's changing, you know, all the other ingredients. So it is really the couteau suisse that is helping perfumer while dosing it or overdosing it to absolutely change, you know, the olfactive facets of the creation that the perfumer is doing. I'm having here a quote of one of our perfumers, Jacques Huclier, who said, adding patchouli to a fragrance and it starts to vibrate. It's like a heartbeat bringing a scent to life. So we really like these quotes. Today, we decided to let you smell because also we are at Essence, you know, so very haute parfumerie and niche-driven. Two of, we would say, icon when it comes to the usage of perfumery, of the patchouli in haute parfumerie. The first one is Tempo. And why we decided to let you smell it? It's from Diptyque. It was created by Olivier Pecheux. It's because it's exactly making the link with the history that Génie was telling you. Tempo was created for the 50th anniversary of Diptyque. So from the 60s to the 2018. So from 68 to 18, and within this celebration of all the mystic impressions that we have from the 60s to a more modern twist, Tempo is really embodying the whole evolution of the patchouli note within the fine fragrance industry. What is interesting within Tempo is that it contains three different varieties of patchouli. Remember, I said to you that we have 5 at our palette, and within Tempo, you have a hint of patchouli absolute that is not so used, you know, and you can smell. It's interesting because by combining all these different patchouli extracts, you can really create something that is very round, very rich from the top to the dry down. of course, the idea was to celebrate the history, but also to project Diptyque into the future. So Olivier, really smooth tempo, adding a lot of also violet leaf to give this comfort also associated to patchouli, to really have this idea of warmth that is triggered through this perfume. The second one that we wanted to highlight, it's a new interpretation of patchouli within the haute parfumerie area, and it's patchouli magnetic from Maison Crivelli that was created by Quentin Biche. And you will see, in fact, we wanted to showcase it today because the story of the creation of this perfume is absolutely stunning. In fact, what happened is that Thibaut Crivelli, who is the owner of the Maison Crivelli, at some point visited some patchouli plantation in Indonesia. And at the time he was visiting these plantations, a storm arrived and a storm appeared. And there was, of course, a lot of electric light and eclair, in the sky. So for him, he wanted to recreate this idea of an electric patchouli, a patchouli that has been electrified, that is more luminous, and that is, in fact, really vibrating, and he wanted to celebrate the vibrating character of patchouli. So Quentin really created this fragrance, that has a surprising contrast. It's dark, it's woody, it's patchouli, but also you have this electric effect thanks to a milky notes, that make it also very comfortable. And also, thanks to sandalwood and gardenia, you have a bit of zing, but it's a woody zing. It's not a citrus zing, It's something that is like, cutting the fragrance, like a kind of olfactive accident. In fact, that is very interesting. So as you can see, patchouli can be really, can really be played into different olfactive families. Here we really wanted to let you smell two icons of, the reinvention of patchouli within the modern haute parfumerie area. But as I told you, you can combine, of course, patchouli with flowers, with fruits, with gourmand. You can really combine it also to create masculine fragrances. So it's really, something that is always on trends. So what are the new trends around patchouli? What are the new expression of patchouli? So we looked at all the markets, we looked at all our trends experts all around the world, and we asked them, okay, what do you think would be the future of patchouli in perfumery? And as I was telling you, so we came up with these 4 platforms that are quite, we hope, interesting for you. The first one, it was this idea that nowadays patchouli can really reinvent and help to reinvent floral and neo-gourmand textures. For example, you can really add patchouli to add vibration to the floral sea, so it gives this kind of luminous electric effect, but it's also a way to, in fact, desugarize, gourmand. And for example, if you play with more, I would say, for example, pistachio, that is super on trend at the moment, or almond, more creamy textures, patchouli will bring a grown-up touch to gourmand, and as such, it will be less regressive, less nostalgic, and less childish. So combining both, this neo-gourmand texture and also the radiant floral sea can be an interesting way to pursue, in the future, to reinvent, particularly this one on the feminine area or on the universal area, because now we say universal, that can be very interesting to still be on the comforting side of the patchouli while adding a bit of floral sea and reinventing the gourmand area. The second platform is, of course, talking about Chypre, and there is a big vintage retro, trends all over the world. A lot of brands are looking at their patrimony, to relaunch some of their patrimony. You have some brands that are really playing also around this vintage touch. So it's really interesting because the youngest of us, the Gen Z, we are not a Gen Z anymore, but we are looking at them a lot, and the way they are consuming and their relationship to the world, they are really really into looking back to the past to take inspiration to reinvent the future. So this idea of playing on retro without being old, it's difficult because you have a slight cursor, you know, you have to be careful, but playing on retro Chypre is interesting, and to avoid becoming into the old, entering into the old area, then you have to play on fruits, that is a strong marker and imprinting smells of the Gen Z, but fruits that are very sparkling, so not sugary fruits that are juicy, that are fleshy, that are sparkling, and as such, you will be able to reinvent Chypre and really play with both the retro facet of it and that is modern for the Gen Z, and also reassuring them with their fruity imprinting smells that they are very familiar with if you treat it on the sparkling, juicy way. The third platform that we strongly believe in for the future is to play, in fact, patchouli for the clean and nude area and make it the new ingredient for freshness. And this is interesting because it's not something that is so immediate in the mind, you know, but as we said, patchouli is used in a lot of, in fact, personal care product or home care product to convey this notion of freshness. So we strongly think that even in fine fragrance, it can be an interesting ingredient to reinvent musk and aldehydes, because aldehydes can be seen as too cold, so adding a hint of patchouli will counterbalance this aldehyde, and by playing, you know, by the sensation of daim, nudeness, you know, you can bring a lot of sensuality on top of the cleanliness, and as such create a new outre blanc type of fragrance. And the last one is perhaps the most obvious one, but you know, of course, woody, and you just have to smell, you know, what's happening on the level up. Woody is everywhere, you know, and it's more and more intense. So reinventing, you know, the intensity of wood thanks to new extract of patchouli, new quality of patchouli is interesting, and to really create newness, think about minerality, because when you are smelling patchouli, you know, you can have this perhaps slightly cacao, cocoa notes. And if you balance it with this notion of mineral, salty effect, then you create a completely new trend, perhaps also interesting for the masculine area, or again, the universal area, but something that is very interesting because you can really approach consumer with something that is very different, and playing with the contrast between earth and sea salt and earth and minerality is something that could be very interesting when we are all looking at finding our new roots for the future. So as we've seen, you know, patchouli has a strong history. It is rich, it is diverse, and it's the reason why it's such an ingredient that we all have to take care of, and that we have to, in fact, protect for the future generation. So, of course, you know, at Givaudan, we have this Sourcing for Good program that is absolutely at the heart of all, you know, our filière. So, and particularly on the patchouli, we are really measuring, you know, the success when it's come about sourcing, and it's absolutely key for us to protect the future of patchouli. We also have a program with the Givaudan Foundation where we are helping the local communities. You know, we are helping them by, for example, creating libraries in primary school, you know, helping them also with the Indonesian forestry organization to ensure the renewability of the wood that is used to do the distillation. These are just few examples of the programs that are happening in Indonesia. But the future of sustainability for patchouli is even more exciting, because us, fragrance houses, we are becoming agricultures, in fact. And at Givaudan, we are engaged into a strong agronomical program for patchouli. And this is a big premiere in this industry, so it's the reason why we are quite proud about it. In fact, you know, we are now looking at having the patchouli becoming, and the culture of patchouli becoming climate positive in the coming years. And why is it so important? Because perhaps you don't know, we say it's a very versatile ingredient, but the plant itself is killing itself because it's an autotoxic plant, meaning, you know, after 2 years, the plant is in fact, you know, toxifying earth. and at least, it cannot grow anymore. It's the reason why the culture of patchouli have moved from one island in Indonesia to another island. It's the reason why people have to leave Earth for a long time before to help the Earth to regenerate itself. And thanks to new discovery, new progress in agronomy, we are now able to help the agriculture and the people who are cultivating patchouli to rejuvenate, Earth and to rejuvenate the soils. And this is something that is absolutely new and absolutely key for the future of patchouli, but also for the future of the people that are cultivating the patchouli, because then they can stay, and they can stay where they live, and they don't have to move into other areas. So this new agronomical area is a key one. Patchouli is one of the programs that is pioneering this new approach about cultivating plant à parfum. But of course, others will follow and others are following. So this idea of also being able to become climate positive, and also having a true regenerative agricultural system, it's the future of perfumery, and it's the reason why we are strongly engaged at Givaudan to put it and to push it to the most new areas that we can. So I hope you enjoy patchouli and this conference. We all love patchouli. At least I hope that you will all love patchouli at the end of this conference. And we were really pleased to be invited by Excellence. So thank you so much. And if you have questions, don't hesitate. We still have 5 minutes, I think. So thank you. Yes. Akigala wood, in fact, it's an upcycled ingredient coming from the residues of the patchouli distillation. So when the patchouli had been distillated, we take the residues and then we do an enzymatic enrichment on these residues that is allowing, in fact, the residues to express a new olfactive note. And this is Akigala wood. Yes?
I'm Miko from independent student from Poland, let's say. And a short question, what do you think about aging patchouli? I heard it's good for aging. I even have a 2017 patchouli ingredient with me. Did you try this?
So we are always looking for new quality coming from patchouli because it's an iconic ingredient. So you've seen we have been able to innovate in this area with these 5 new extracts that we have in our catalog. So we've run some tests. At the moment, we don't have any evidence that having the patchouli being aged for longer, you still have a minimum to respect. But after, we don't have evidence that when you are distillating it, you find another quality. The other thing is that, of course, because of the quantity of patchouli that is used in all the category and all the fragrances, it would be difficult, to secure this quantity if we let in aging. But even for small quantity, we don't have any evidences that after a certain amount of time, the oil and the expression of the leaves will change. But perhaps we'll discover, it's always an area of discovery. No other questions. So yeah.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question regarding the cultural side of the patchouli. You said there's been throughout the history, there's been kind of a wave with the hippies. And what is current stage of patchouli? Why is it? What wave or cultural social wave is it taking? Because we see that liberal side and then it goes to the conservative side. What is going on right now with patchouli?
We strong, and I will take it, but perhaps you
maybe
that,
it's a good question to Eugenia.
But I think that what is interesting, as I showed you, we have really identified new olfactive trends around patchouli that are very interesting. The word patchouli itself, sometimes, it's off-putting. So within your pyramid, sometimes it's interesting to perhaps express it into different ways or to explain why patchouli is important or not. The good thing is that, Eugenie said that patchouli is all about authenticity. It's a very authentic ingredient with its strength and its failure. So at the moment where all the society and all the people are looking to reconnect with their authentic self, we strongly believe that patchouli has a momentum at the moment.
Yeah, that's precisely why I was asking about Gen Z. I guess the hint was on Gen Z. how Gen Z is going to apply in the future, in the sense, because we've seen the previous conversation that Gen Z is growing into the niche perfumes, and that may be some kind of trend going with a connection of Gen Z with the patchouli, because as far as I think, right now, patchouli is more for traditional.
It depends. It depends. For example, into the 4 platforms, the 4 forecasting platforms that I showed you, the retro chip with the sparkling fruits could typically appeal to Gen Z, but also the clean one with the musk and the aldehyde and the reinvention of a fresh patchouli can really please the Gen Z also.
That's the answer. I wanted this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much and have a lovely day. Thank you.